Hello, everyone. This is Frank Nunez, and today we are with either Lorenzo, Laurent, or Lawrence. He's going to tell us a little bit about his identity and why, what he does, where he's lived, a little bit of history about him. So we're really looking forward to this. Okay. Let me just hand this over to you now, Lawrence.
Okay, so Frank, Pancho, whatever. Let's make this more of a dialogue between you and me.
You got
it. And
Paco,
orale. So the first thing, Frank, is this. Okay. My mother called me Laurent. My father called me Lawrence. And most of my cuates in Mexico say, si no te lo hubieran puesto tus papás, todos nos te lo hubiéramos puesto tú, because Lorenzo means you're kind of crazy. All my life, I've been actually known by 3 different names, depending on what language and what we were doing. And this has actually given me a really unique perspective on names themselves, right? And what we call things.
Right.
And how does that relate to what we're going to talk about? I've been working with risk, with strategy and risk, and companies who are assessing risks, and we've all been doing the strategy and the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, etc. And I've been looking at, obviously, we look at uncertainty. And we were talking about different levels of uncertainty, and high predictability and medium uncertainty and high uncertainty. And I realized that all of these were inadequate. And so I coined the term hyper uncertainty. I then actually realized that other people had used it. But when I said, we're not in high uncertainty. We're in a period of hyper uncertainty. And what is a period of hyper uncertainty? Well, if we compare it to inflation, if we use as a parameter inflation, we have low inflation, 1 or 2% a year, moderate inflation, 4, 5, 6% a year, high inflation, 10, 12, 15% a year, right? Very high inflation, we start getting to 20%. But in all these scenarios, inflation is one factor that you put into your predictions, your models, your decision making, right? But when you get to hyperinflation, where you are is like 3 digits, 300%, 3,000%, right? Like you've had in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico during the 90s. Inflation determines everything, right? All your decisions are around how fast are prices going up. Well, we're in a period in which uncertainty determines everything. And that's what I'm calling hyper uncertainty. It means that absolutely nothing that you predict today you can predict absolutely nothing with a high degree of certainty.
And that is so cool that you came up with that, because we keep hearing people, no names to mention yet. We're not going to start, beating up on people, but so many people think that they know what's going to happen, what's next, how to do it. I noticed in the media, in the social networks, that there's a lot of guessing and speculation of what's going to happen. Like, for instance, with tourism and stuff, it's completely uncertain. And one of the things that could be a little frustrating is that we're too eager and too quick to try to have an answer. The only thing we can be sure of is what you're talking about right now, that it's just, we've all entered the realm of uncertainty. And this is, in a sense, hyper uncertainty. You're giving it that label because of obvious reasons. So that is good. Let's all understand that. So what is, without getting into the opposite of what I just said, this hyper uncertainty seems to have its level. So are they different levels of uncertainty? Are we going to get to the point where we're going to say, okay, we're somewhat uncertain, but a little bit more?
And I think that the way we've sort of been approaching things, and certainly in the business world, right? Let's think of what did the business theorist and the management theorist, remember,
right?
you know, 150 years ago, no one was really doing any real thinking. I mean, the only things people were doing was basic accounting, right?
Yeah.
Until the beginning of the 20th century, no one really thought about business. And by the way, you know, when I was at university, it was the dumbest people who took business management, right?
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah. You know, I mean, the people who took business management, right, were the people who just couldn't cut it in other fields, right? If you were smart, you did things like engineering or medicine or
Specialized.
literature or philosophy, right? You know,
Right.
one of the big careers was PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics, right? Or classics, Greek and Latin, or
Right.
history, right? And you know, if you just couldn't quite cut it, well, you'd take business management. Now, so business management is something really recent, really recent. I mean, and it really starts at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, with a guy called Taylor, and he's the one who started looking for efficiency. He started doing these time and motion studies. So, you know, he sort of worked out that if a worker he'd take a worker and he started timing them. A worker with a shovel, how many shovel loads of coal could he do in an hour, and then how many could he do in a day, and if you move the pile of coal closer to the furnace, then he could get more coal into the furnace, etc. So the goal was efficiency, right?
Right.
And that, you know, and we already knew from Adam Smith's division of labor that, you know, if one person just did one thing and concentrated on that, he'd be more efficient at it, right? Then that was fine. That was fine while basically the economy was moving into a sort of industrial economy. So that was fine while the economy was driven by industrial processes. But starting basically after this, in the post-war period, from, you know, the 1945, 1950s, we moved from quantitative analysis to a qualitative perspective, right? Which is like, basically that's where Peter Drucker gives us the knowledge worker, right? Suddenly we weren't measuring what a guy with shovels, but we were trying to understand, how do you make people whose basic work is to think, right? How do you make them effective? How they need to, so that's where we got into all our management theories of leadership and strategy and teamwork, etc., and communication, right? And we moved from a quantitative approach to a qualitative approach. Well, what I'm saying now is we have now moved into quantum management, you know, and and I'm using this, you know, what happened in physics, right? For many years, for years, we've been guided, we've been basically defined by Newtonian physics, right? The laws of Newtonian physics, which basically say an object can't be in two places at the same time. That if you know where it started from and you know the forces acting on it, you know where it will be after a certain amount of time.
Right.
And then suddenly, at the beginning of the 20th century, you know, these geniuses, Einstein, Max Planck, Niels Bohr, etc., tell us things that are totally impossible to actually really understand, you know, with our everyday minds. I mean, they tell us that a particle can be in two places at the same time. In fact, they tell us that light can be energy, but it can also be matter. It depends on how you look at it. Right? Okay. Some of them say at every instant, every particle, every electron is splitting into two universes. So that's one of the theories they have, is the multiple universe theory. Okay. What all these things have in common is that they are impossible to predict, right? With the tools we've been using. Well, That's where we've moved into. We've moved into quantum management. It is impossible to know. Look, in 1985, you know, here in Mexico, we have an expression called el charolazo, right? This is when a government official takes out his ID, right? And says, do you know who I am? No sabes quién soy, right? No sabes con quién te estás metiendo. Okay. So let us imagine in 1985, we're in the Soviet Union, and you can believe me that existed in the Soviet Union. I bet it exists in China as well. Okay, and a traffic cop stops a top-level politician and says to him, and the politician gets out and says, do you know who I am? You have no idea. I am the General Secretary of the Communist Party for the region of Novosibirsk. And the traffic cop is terrified, right? He's now absolutely convinced he's going to go to, he's off to Siberia on the next train, right? And if anyone had told that politician in 1985, you know, in 2-3 years, that ID that you've just shoved in this guy's face won't be worth the paper it's printed on, he'd have thought you were crazy, right? Apart from having you arrested, etc. He'd probably have had you sent to a lunatic asylum, not to prison, because ever since the Communist Party took power, that having that sort of an ID gave them total power. Well, you know, within 3 years, the Berlin Wall had come down, and by 1991, there was no Soviet Union. There was Russia and 15 independent republics, or whatever the number was, I bet, right? It had split into all the Baltic states, and the Kazakhstans and the Uzbekistans had become their independent republics. Well, what would you have told me if I'd done a strategic planning exercise in November, and we had tried, and I'd said, okay, now what might happen to the price of oil? And if I'd ever said to anyone, oh, and by the way, the day may come where they say, well, I'll take this oil off your hands if you pay me $37 a barrel, which happened last month, right? You know, I'd have been locked up as a lunatic. Right. What would have happened if you had told, if you'd said, let's consider a possibility of even if we considered a pandemic, even if we'd thrown in the possibility of a pandemic and said that 80% of the population of liberal democracies would voluntarily accept house arrest for 3 months. They'd all in France, which is one of my countries, right? 6 weeks before this happened, they were vandalizing the Arc de Triomphe and burning the stores on the Champs-Élysées. And all these people quietly went into confinement and accepted to go into what became, in effect, house arrest, right? If they leave their houses without an excuse, the first time, I believe, is 135 euros, and the second is a 600 euro fine. And, you know, that's, you know, more or less the same as $1, right? Right. And so what hyper uncertainty I would define as a state in which the unthinkable becomes your everyday reality.
And I think what I heard you say, I'm going to sum it up a little bit. Over the years, going way back, there's always been the unimaginable. There's always been that situation where, like, who would have thought, right? And it happened. Who would have thought and it happened? Once again, now we're facing that. But I think I want to touch a little bit on this, on the what's new about it this time. And I think, correct me or let me know if I'm wrong. Is this the first time that it's really become global? We have a common denominator. It's a common fear now. We have a lot of, you know, all of a sudden we started trying to unite as a world to fight something. Is that the first time that happens? Is that something, who would have imagined that would happen? You know, like 6 months ago, if somebody would have bet me money, I bet you all the countries are going to get together. They're going to go into this house arrest and we're going to fight a common enemy. Is that the first time this happens?
I'm not really happy with the war metaphors here, right? I mean, I think it's really interesting that.
But not all countries were at war, man.
Huh?
Not all countries went to war. Are you talking about world wars?
Yeah, exactly. So
not the whole world was at war.
And I'm not actually sure that we have all come together. I mean, I think that. So look, I think several things are have happened that are totally different, and which are what are driving the hyper uncertainty, right? I'm actually looking past the pandemics. We've had pandemics, right? I mean, there was the Spanish flu in 1918,
Sure.
killed many more millions than this one is likely to kill. The plague, the plague in the 14th century killed half the population of different countries within 2 or 3 years, right? So no, I think what is driving the hyper uncertainty, and actually this pandemic is just it's between a symptom and a catalyst, right? Of what is coming. No, what's driving it is hyperconnectivity. So look, let's think about how we've connected each other. Okay, in primitive societies, right? People are hunter-gatherers, and you don't really know anyone who's not from your tribe, right? These are tribes of 100, 150 maximum, right? You have sort of groups of several families. Most of your basic economy is nomads, right? And then they invent writing. At first, writing is chiseled on tablets of stone or clay, right? I mean, right, that's why we get the 10 Commandments on the tablets of stone, right? Okay, that allows you to do something that's, that couldn't be done before. You can pass a message from one generation to another, right? That connects those from one generation to another. And of course, the first peoples who got that became very powerful, became, they coalesced as a people around these written documents. Well, then the Chinese invented paper, right? And that meant it was a hell of a lot more convenient than tablets of stone. And suddenly, all sorts of commerce was possible. You could write that eventually allowed letters of credit and promises to pay, etc., right? And the world expanded enormously with the invention of writing. Then in the 15th century, Gutenberg invents the printing press. Well, that changed everything. One of the things it's changed was that in education, instead of education being something reserved for the nobles, for aristocrats who had their private tutor, right? Suddenly, because you had a textbook, you could put 30 children in a family, and education became available to the middle classes. It changed culturally. It changed the religion. The schism in Christianity could never have occurred without the possibility of a Bible in every home. Until then, you had to have the priest interpreting the gospel. Actually, it created another thing. It created the sort of the CDOs of the 15th century. In other words, if we're talking about a junk bond, a financial instrument that has no value, right, but that people are willing to buy, well, the first one was also enabled by the printing press, and those were the indulgences. See, the the Pope would give you, against a donation, you would get so many thousands of years knocked off your time in purgatory, right? Well, at first, monks, until the printing press, monks had to write out these indulgences. So you would take your hard-earned savings, right, and go and buy yourselves, 10,000 years off purgatory. Well, suddenly with the printing press, they could mass produce these and just get the signature on. That was what actually created the indignation of Luther. That's my understanding of it, my reading. I'm not a historian, but I pick up these bits and pieces over time. So what has happened now, if we look fast forward, right? The printing press allowed the great discoveries, it allowed the science to be transmitted all over the world, because people could suddenly get the work that had been produced in one country could be taken and translate. Well, most people spoke Latin, so it could be printed and distributed throughout the world. Well, at the beginning of the 19th century, okay, we start getting, in the middle of the 19th. So, in the 19th century, we start the communications revolution. It starts with the telegraph. We move on to the telephone. It then moves to the television and to radio and then television. And then we get the internet in the 90s. Then in the iPhone, I'd need to check, but it seems to me, but from memory, it was only a couple of years ago that we were celebrating 10 years of the iPhone, which means 10 years of the smartphone. So we have only been connected in this way for let's say 10, 15 years, right? And each of these technological jumps has created all sorts of new worlds. For example, the arrival of television created the advertising industry, basically. I mean, there'd been billboards and there'd been posters and flyers, right? But the multi-billion-dollar advertising agency came in through television. The internet produced businesses like Amazon, right? Suddenly you could place an order. Or Airbnb, you could suddenly rent out a room. The smartphone allowed businesses like Uber. But the other thing it did was it made us aware all the time of what was happening everywhere. So when something happened in China, I think it would have been unthinkable. It would have been absolutely unthinkable for us to have accepted lockdown if it hadn't happened in China. Now, it happened in a communist dictatorship, right? But that didn't stop it being adopted. It worked. It worked to contain the epidemic. At the time, it wasn't yet a pandemic. And when Italy started seeing its death toll rise, they decided to implement the policies that had been done in China. When they did it in China, everyone said, "Oh, they can do it because they are Chinese and because of their system, right?" But we'd never be able to do it here. So this is what I mean by this era. None of the premises that were valid a month ago can be taken for granted anymore, right? 3 months ago or 6 months ago, right? You'd have said it is impossible. You could never do that in a liberal democracy, right? But because of the hyperconnectedness, well, part of it was, of course, the disease itself spread. The virus itself spread because of hyperconnectedness. But the other is because of hyperconnectedness, we accepted that we had to do what the Chinese had done. What just a few weeks before, you'd have said you can only do that in China.
Hmm. That's exactly right. So, all right, now we understand hyper connectivity nowadays. Obviously, you gave us a really good diagram on how it all started and how we started connecting more and more and how it progressed. And now, because of hyperconnectivity, we have somewhat of a global unity. Let's be positive about this, where we're actually dealing with this pandemic. The entire world is dealing with it, within reason, each of them their own laws and rules. So excellent. Back to hyper uncertainty. Hyper uncertainty, we also understand it's always uncertainty has always been there, because I think as new things are invented over the years, just like you explained with the connectivity, we realize that the uncertain is coming at one point. We don't know what's next. Even right now today, of course, we're like, okay, what's going to be the next thing that's going to happen in the next 20 years? We're uncertain, more now than ever. But there's got to be, let's go to basics. There's got to be some things that are sure things. We gotta eat, we gotta breathe, we're gonna get sick, we're gonna live, we're gonna die, those kinds of basic human things, you know. But with every uncertainty, and I want to use the word equilibrium, there's gotta be some must-haves. The survival, the reproduction, that stuff, and how it's all gonna blend in, because well, maybe not. Maybe we'll stop reproducing. Maybe we won't need to feed ourselves. We don't know. I mean, that's the hyper uncertainty that I think you're talking about. We really don't know anything anymore. We may have to venture onto other planets, or other people from other planets coming here. Who knows? We cannot cross it out of the list right now.
Look, the way, exactly. I, so I think the thing we need to look at is actually time horizons. I was talking to someone the other day, and he was telling me this is a guy who really knows everything there is to know about the oil and gas markets. And he was making some projections. He says, yes, but within this uncertainty, I think there's certain things that we can see. And I'm starting to work on a model for 5 years. I mean, we could have a nuclear war within the next 5 months, right?
Right.
It's, that's certainly something within the range of possibilities, right? And I'm not talking a nuclear war between China and the United States, but we could have a few small-scale nuclear bombs dropped somewhere in the Middle East. But that would change absolutely everything, right? I mean, that's certainly no more unlikely than what we've just gone through in the last few months, right? That
Right.
suddenly
It's easier to accept.
Yeah.
It's easier to accept nuclear bombs than
Well, Israel has a nuclear arsenal. India and Pakistan have a nuclear arsenal. There's a constant level of threat. So, Camus has a fantastic novel which I recommend everyone should read, The Plague, in which it's actually a fantastic study of it's a novel, and it reads kind of like it's a page turner as a novel, but it's also a deep moral reflection, and it's also an allegory on the Nazi occupation of Europe. So it's got a lot of, but it's about a city that gets locked down under a plague, right? The bubonic plague.
All right.
And he's got this phrase which says, we have had plagues and wars since the beginning of time, but plagues and wars always catch humanity unawares. We're never ready for them. So we're never ready for these things that are so obvious in hindsight. Yes, you can see exactly how this was happening. Now, so I guess you say, if you want to say, what can we be certain of? Very little, very little. I guess that what we can do is, so this is where, those of us who've been working with companies, etc., and if we look at the B2R model, it says vision to results. That's where the B comes from. You're right. Okay. And for years I've been doing these exercises in which you say, right, where do we see ourselves in 5 years' time, etc. Well, that's just gone completely out of the window. And I was saying, well, what do I do with that? And I said, well, actually, what we need now is to say, how can I see clearly where I am today? Okay, which is actually the Buddhist tradition of vipassana means to see that which is, ver lo que es. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to actually just see what is, right? And there's that film with Denzel Washington and Anthony Hopkins, where Anthony Hopkins has been living with gorillas and what's it called? Instinct, I believe. And he's been living with the gorillas, and some poachers have come across the gorillas, and they've killed this gorilla family that he's been living with in Kenya. And he goes berserk and he kills. Actually, I believe they're military, the poacher. So he's on trial for murder, and he's brought back to the States, and he's being evaluated by Denzel Washington, who's maybe Cuba Gooding. I have to check that.
I don't remember.
Yeah, otherwise it just sounds like, okay, so
you're making up a movie, that's fine.
No. Worse than that, we need to cut this bit out because it means that all black actors are the same for me.
They all look alike, man.
Yeah, so if I'm confusing Cuba Gooding and Denzel Washington, and
I don't remember who it was, but I
need to check. Well, this anecdote can't go in without checking it.
Right. But that's a great movie. It's a great movie, and it makes.
Can you check it? Well, can you go get? Can you check it? Yeah.
You could just call him an actor for now. Oh, my phone.
Okay, it's okay. So, anyway, it doesn't matter. So, okay, hold on one second. I actually had better check this.
Here,
well, no, I don't need. No, we'll just change the anecdote. Okay.
You got it.
Okay. Anyway, so there's this scene in which the psychiatrist. So let's just start this, and we can say it differently, and I just don't say the actor's name. So there's this scene in which he's undergoing his psychiatric evaluation, right? And Anthony Hopkins grabs the psychiatrist by the throat, and he says to him, "What is it that I've taken from you?" And the guy says, "My freedom." Wrong. Right, and he gives him 3 chances to answer the question correctly.
Remember that scene.
And he says, "My freedom." Wrong. You never had it. "My power." Wrong. You never had it. And finally, the guy, he's about to be choked to death, says, "The illusion of power." Right, and this is where we are today. Well,
Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yeah, it was Cuba Gooding. Yeah, okay. So this is where we are today. What has happened is that all our illusions are being stripped away at breakneck speed. Right? Everything that we took for granted, and that we have no idea how to work when we have no basis on which to make predictions.
Wow. Yeah, because of the hyper uncertainty, we can't make a prediction.
Right. That's what I would define as a state of hyper uncertainty.
Right.
All all the premises on which we would have. You see, if you're even in a state of very high uncertainty, you still have a lot. There's things that can. You still have a lot of things that you've got a fair degree of probability of them not changing, right? Okay, so yeah, we have some things that we've got plenty of things that we can guess will not change. I mean, the sun will probably rise tomorrow, right? But
Well, what about, hold on. When we have hyper, like when I hear you say hyper uncertainty, it literally attacks my purpose in life right now. I mean, literally. I mean, it's like, what is my, why am I here? You know, so it's, we are getting to the point where certain basic essences of life, I think, of what we aspire, and, you know, people like me, we're late bloomers with ambition. I became ambitious at a late, you know, and all of a sudden it's like, my ambition is being attacked by that comment. Uh, you know, so it's kind of, it's a heavy word, but it's a very correct hyper phrase, I guess, to the times. Basically, what I think follows that, and we're not, you know, we may talk about this later, and we may talk about this a lot in everything every time we meet, because that hyper uncertainty is not going anywhere. But we need to know what follows with it. Like, how do we keep that essence of I have a purpose in life?
okay,
You know?
so as I was telling you that, you know, when I started this V2R model, it actually came to me, I won't say in a dream, it came to me in the middle of the night. Okay, and one day I'll tell that story, right? But it was in a totally different world, and then I realized, wait a minute, but it works perfect. It really fits this environment, but in a different way. So just like I said, we did these vision exercises. You know, we would do these values exercises, and honestly, they were bullshit,
Yeah.
right? So I'd sit with a group, so what are our values? And, you know, you'd be in a company, oh, integrity and service to the customer, you know. No, in this new context, values is not just something to have you know, it's not a BS concept to sort of, to just, you know, to stick on your wall. We all now, this really calls into question, what do I value? What is important? Where are my real priorities? Well, I mean, we've all been faced with one that was above all and all others, right? Which is
Right.
health and
Right.
health. I mean,
That's
oh my
yeah.
God. Oh my God, you know, I thought changing my car was an important thing to do this year. No, staying alive, actually.
Right.
Staying alive is more important, right?
So what I'm hearing you say is hyper uncertainty is making you narrow down what's really crucial in your life, including health, maybe family, those kinds of very, not primitive, but basic, very basic needs in life. And now you're focusing on them more. And I'm an example of that. I quit traveling and now I see my kids. It's like, oh my God, this is a gift for me. I get to see my kids all the time. You know, so those are the things that
Then, so that makes you question the values you had before, right? Because you're saying,
That's
wait a minute.
right.
So how important was it?
Exactly.
How important was it to like to be on the road all the time to make a few $1,000s more, right? When that
Yeah.
was the cost of not seeing my kids grow up.
Right. Right. I was
Okay.
sacrificing a lot, man. So this to me is a gift. I mean, I cannot. Sure, there are a lot of things I can complain about, but I'm gonna see the benefit. I'm squeezing the good out of this. I'm squeezing the good out of it, and it's in this case, family, children.
Look, I'm sure that in your business, Frank, your business is, I've got no idea how your business is going to change. I mean, basically, you know, like, okay, so you know, you'll see what you edit in and edit out of this, right? But now let's get into, and this may be the way to do it. I mean, you know, like, okay, so let me, because I've kind of been projecting these things
Right.
for the record, right? Now I want to talk to you the way I really talk.
You got it. That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Okay. So look, let's look at your business, Frank. You know, you've basically got two lines of business, right? This is what I'm seeing. You know, you've got two totally different lines of business. Actually, you've got three. You've got one which is managing the logistics between doctors and patients, right? Mainly dentists, right? How does a patient who wants an implant find a dentist who will give him that implant, and how to book him his appointments? I mean, it's not, you know, right? And you do that, and you charge an intermediation fee. Okay. I don't think that one will change radically. I can't imagine a way of putting it. I can't see how treating teeth can be done in any way except
Can't
going
do
and
it
sitting in a
online.
chair. Right. Okay. So there'll be some differences there. I've got no, I mean, dentists will take more care. There'll be more protection, etc. Right. But people will continue. I mean, I had to go. Oh, I'll have to tell you about that. I had to go to and have one of my implants extracted. It got infected.
Hmm.
Okay, so I actually had to have that done the other day. Okay,
Sorry.
so even in times of
You have to go.
you have to go. Okay, you have another business which you were getting into and really enjoying, which was the workshop business.
Correct.
Okay, so that one will change, right? That one will change, and you're going to have to do those online, right? Right, and that will change quite a lot, right?
Right.
But the conventions and events business, my guess is that one disappears. That one completely disappears. Okay, so in Spanish, I just as a shorthand, I call this MMS. I mean, right, which is algunos van a mutar, otros van a morir, y otros van a surgir.
Survive.
New things will arise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely new things will arise, and I mean, I can imagine something that arises, which are holographic meetings, right? So people start working and say, well, if everyone's going to be online all the time, I don't know, maybe we have get something, like Google Glass or whatever, and suddenly we really get a virtual reality experience. That we're not very far from that technically, right?
Yeah.
So that one seems to me that I'd be very surprised if something like that didn't happen within the next year or so. Right?
I would say before then. I see them advertised already. So
okay, so there you go. Okay, then maybe someone goes and says, let's have a holographic meeting, right? Okay, and I mean, who knows? But I mean, these are just the first thing. But think about some of the inventions that came up. Okay, we were talking about Airbnb. Airbnb, it starts because some graphic designers have got some friends want to come to a designer convention in San Francisco, and everything is expensive as hell, and they decided to put some air mattresses out on the floor, right? And then they say, wow, we could do this. We just need to create a website where people can book the room, right? And that became Airbnb because the internet exists. Uber, there's so many people who have a car and don't have a job. And now that everyone has a smartphone, it would be really easy to put those together, right? And that becomes Uber. Well, we've got no idea what'll come out from this. For example, one of the things that's absolutely clear is that the whole video conferencing, right, is going to have it's clearly going to have a big impact. I mean, in other words, even if you sort of said, well, what would be something that would be close to normal, right? Well, who's going to talk about going back to everyone coming and sitting in a cubicle when that means everyone spending, in Mexico City, an hour and a half each way, between 2 and 3 hours moving, in the day, moving between home and work. Businesses needing to buy or rent space, right? 70% of which they wouldn't actually need if the work that could be done from home was being done from home. Right? So if you're a business now, I mean, and I'm just talking about things that people are already doing, right? I mean,
sure.
Why would I have a 35 floor tower when actually, I could probably fit everyone who on any given day who needs to be here in 8 floors. Well, you know, those other 20, whatever, 27 floors are really expensive, right? Why would I invest in all that? That's 27 floors full of furniture, computers, right? Cleaning people. So that, you know, so how do you deal with hyper uncertainty? You start looking at saying, well, where are we today and what has happened? What has happened? What has happened and where are we? Right?
I have a question. So I think there are different possible futures. My thought to generate conversation with you. What would get things back to normal, close to the normal that we're used to, which is concerts, travel, airplanes, transportation with multiple people in each bus. It would be a simple vaccine, right? A vaccine. Now the uncertainty will continue even if we have a vaccine for COVID, because now we know that things can come up just, I don't know, from one day to the next. So we know that. But even knowing that, we knew that in past situations when we had viruses and we had other, but we went back to the normal. Maybe this time we won't go back 100%. But what do you think, let's just say, let's guesstimate here. We know that we're people's, you know, we're creatures of habit, and we like to gather, man. And I know I do. I'm a social guy. I want to talk to people. I want to go play dominoes. I just want to go to somebody's party and celebrate his birthday. How, of that 100% that we had pre-COVID, what do you think that's going to happen with the vaccine as far as going back to the normal?
This is, you know, there's an organization which one might take a look at, because it deals with people who have to completely rethink their whole lives, right? And that's Alcoholics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. You see, I'm not going to talk about the other one. Okay. They talk about hitting bottom, and where we were was on a track that was unsustainable. We were, in fact, anyone who'd been looking at our society from the outside, you know, let's say we were some highly advanced culture, right? That sort of stuck out there in hyperspace, right? Just observing what is happening on this planet. I think these guys are crazy. This, you know, this can't go on. And people have been telling them this for a long time, and they're not listening. Well, you know, so, look, there's nothing you can do. You can't tell them. They're just going to have to let them hit bottom. So now you've polluted your oceans. You've polluted your rivers. You've made your populations so fat they can't move, right? So they've got diabetes. They've got obesity, right? And all they're dreaming of is, you know, getting some more stuff into their mouths and getting some more fun into their lives, right? And it ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work. But you can't tell them that, because all of them are saying, they're like the alcoholic who says, well, you know, maybe I'm just gonna have a drink in the evenings. I'm not gonna drink during the day, or I'm not gonna drink during the week, right? But the problem is that they've become addicted to like more and more and more of everything, right? Well, the only way they're going to come out of that is by breaking the cycle of addiction. Now, it's not true that everyone wants to hug. You know, Japanese don't hug. I mean, this is very culturally determined. You know, Mexicans hug, but they don't kiss between men. The French do, and the Argentinians do. Right? There's absolutely nothing that says that we have to continue getting together in the same sort of ways that we've been getting together. You know, those of us who were brought up hugging and kissing, right, will miss it, right? We'll probably find the transition difficult. But, you know, if you start teaching your kids, you know, don't shake hands with people, you might get a disease, right? You know, don't kiss anyone you don't know. In fact, maybe stop kissing completely, stop hugging completely. I mean, you know, there may be new pandemics. I mean, this one's relatively benign. It's very contagious, but it's not very deadly. I mean, it only kills a very small percentage of the people who get it. What if there was a mutation and this one started killing 25% of the people it infected, right? I mean, you know, so when you talk about vaccines, I mean, you know, a virus is just a little chain of molecules. Well, any little change in that chain of molecules, in that virus, any mutation, right, suddenly means that your vaccine doesn't work anymore. And if you think of HIV, right? HIV terrified anyone, or everyone, it terrified us all, right? And it took a long time before, you know, there was that photo of Princess Diana, you know, hugging a patient with HIV, right? And that felt so brave, right? I mean, we knew that HIV couldn't be, you know, could only be transmitted by bodily fluids. It couldn't be transmitted by shaking someone's hand or hugging them, right? But people were terrified. Well, that may well last for a long, long time, maybe forever. I mean, maybe that's again, these are what I'm talking about, the uncertainty. It may last forever. I mean, you know, look, I was assuming that cruise ships, and it would still be an assumption that I would make, will go bankrupt for many reasons, right? I mean, they basically, you know, we basically heard the expression, they are a petri dish for the infection. You know, so hello, darling, where would you like to go for our diamond wedding anniversary? Oh, I've got a great idea. Let me take you in a petri dish to Alaska.
You know, I keep seeing ads. They're already selling tickets for cruise ships in future months.
And actually, they've actually got some bookings are 600% up. But that's because the prices have come crashing down. Now, hotels, airlines, cruise ships are very low margin businesses, right? They have very high operating costs. Right. So
you know, let's take that example. Let's just take a cruise ship example just for the sake. Let's play with this. So you have those powers which are called companies and corporations that are pushing towards a, you know, business, and how do companies make money? People cap, you know, they got to sell, we all know how that works. We're part of it in a small way, I guess. So a cruise ship says, you know what, I'll test everyone as they get on board, and we'll go through we'll go through a process that makes sure and guarantees no one has COVID or the virus by the time they get in there. That would be a little attractive, wouldn't it? I guess.
Look, I can see that. As I say, uncertainty means I don't know. The answer is I don't know. This is the important thing is how do you sort of navigate a period of when you're in hyper uncertainty? You don't claim to have any answers. You just start saying, what are the sort of questions I should be asking myself? What are the sort of questions we should be asking? That it's not, don't even try to think that you've got the answers. Just ask, what are the sort of questions we should be asking? Now, you know, it seems to me that I'm making one assumption. After something as big as this, things will not be the same. So I would think that all scenarios that you draw up, saying, things will be basically the same, but with little tweaks. I think are highly unlikely. I might be wrong.
It'll
I
be
might be
big tweaks with a little bit of the same.
we might be talking here, and you know, and this is the raging alcoholic who used to be who would end up in jail and crashing cars, and you know, and with lipstick on his shirt, and divorced, and his kids won't speak to him, etc. And yeah, he might suddenly learn how to drink, you know, just have a couple of drinks on a Friday night and go back home, right? He might.
So going
I
along
don't think
with
so.
going along
I don't think that's going to happen.
going along with the alcoholic guy in that way of thinking, I think hyper uncertainty is when you start to understand it, you're going to have to go to a level of acceptance.
Yeah.
You have to accept that we have, oh, now we could really look at what the geniuses told us, no, about there are so many parallel universes. Well, we have a shitload of possible futures right now. You know, we don't know if it's going to go left, right, somewhere in the middle, or 100 options between. So we need to accept that we don't know.
In fact, if we look at quantum mechanics, it's an infinite number.
It's an infinite
of
number.
possible.
Oh man, you just scared me with that word. Let's get infinite out of there. That just seems so.
No.
I know it is. I know it is.
You can't take infinite out of there. That is exactly what it means.
I know it is.
That there is, in fact, an infinite number of possibilities.
So accepting that is the first step, man. Because
right.
Otherwise, it's not. All right. So good. Today hyper uncertainty was a super cool topic in term that I think we should continue to use, and maybe it'll help us, right, with our next steps with every day. Every day we wake up, we just realize we live in a world of uncertainty, of hyper uncertainty. That anything can happen tomorrow.
These are the three takeaways that
Okay.
I would say in a period of hyper uncertainty. One, the real challenge is seeing things as they are and not as we want them to be, right? And then that implies just getting to a point of accepting. The main thing about hyper uncertainty is accepting it, accepting that this is the new reality we're in, right? And that implies that we need to see things as they are, understand that it means that we need to revisit and review what it is that is really important to us.
I like that.
And then when nothing is certain, everything becomes a question of probability. And the more we move away from the here and now, the less probable things become. And this is why it's got the parallel with quantum physics, right? As soon as you've made a choice, right, the uncertainty disappears, right? This is, in other words, in the here and now, what's called in quantum physics the collapse of the wave function. Suddenly you've moved from hyper uncertainty to, yes, you and I are here right now, right? This is the only thing that is absolutely certain, is that you and I are talking to each other right now. Nothing else is certain.